cases. Need I say more? So from that time to the injunction. Now what caused the injunction? How did Oakwood get to be named Oakwood? Because when I grew up, there was no such name as Oakwood. Going back to the discussion that I said about the area that my generation, my family called Venice, was the area that I just identified to you with those boundaries. There was no name Oakwood. The name Oakwood came from strategies that generated from this plan, because the police department needed to identify a specific area to be targeted so that the criminality of this particular community could be advanced, so you could get to the elimination of a certain gender, race, economic level of people in the community to make way for where we are now. It's purposeful. Didn't happen by happenstance. The first person that I recall that sold their home in 1995, Mrs. Edwards. She used to be the librarian when the library was over at the Venice, at the Vera Davis Center. And Mrs. Edwards was in her 70s, and she was approached about selling her house. And she was offered $350,000. I may be incorrect about that, but it was within that ballpark area. And that looked like a lot of money to a person who's in their 70s, who is striving to make life better for herself. So she sold her house. And they put a little painted fence around it, spruced up the porch a little bit, and they sold the house for guess how much?
$1 million.
Not yet, because we weren't there yet.
$650.
$500,000. That was the beginning.
Of gentrification.
And
What year, Naomi, do you think?
that was 1995, 96. So I worked in the Stockton, Sacramento area for a while, and I served on the Venice Neighborhood Council. And I used to fly back home to be at the meetings and to participate in the community. I don't know what happened to the little clipping, but there was a little clipping in the paper where a 500 square foot house was being sold for some astronomical amount of money, like $750,000. And this was in the early 2000s. So right then we knew where the community was going. I hear some of the people say, hey, Naomi, it's supply and demand. But our Coastal Commission has the responsibility for supporting, maintaining, and sustaining community. Not just the community in itself, but the heritage, the culture, and the history of the community. So where were they when the community was being sold? And where are they now when the Venice community is being treated as if it is a disposable community as far as people of color are concerned? I belonged to a group called Project Action. Anybody familiar with that? Project Action started right after the Watts riots. Watts riots were in 1965. In an effort by the federal government to quell the unrest in communities of color across this nation, they offered funding. The funding was initially called Summer Crash Program monies. It was money for a 3-month period during the summer, June, July, and August, to infuse urban communities with money so that they could support programs and services that would involve or activate youth within the community to give them something constructive to do. So I was pretty much a vocal person. Imagine that. During the 60s, which was, you know, the rising of the civil rights movement. And so Bob Castile came to me and said, you know all that talking that you're doing out there in the community? Then let's put it on paper and see if we can't get some of this money. So I wrote out in longhand, because we didn't have a typewriter, on 3-ring binder paper. We wrote the proposal for Project Action. And Project Action was to provide job training, job assistance, counseling, and community beautification for our summer crash program. It was going to be involving our youth and people in the community that were unemployed. Lo and behold, we got the money. And so we started Project Action. We opened up an office on Washington Boulevard in the summer of 1966. We started job training programs, counseling, job assistance, and community beautification. We had a plan for people in the community to go knocking on doors to ask people, what would you like to see happen in your community? What changes would you like to see happen? We took that survey information, and out of that came the need for low-income housing, the need for community organizations to support peace and development within the community, and monies to look for jobs and community development in terms of businesses. We had the good fortune of the Project Action program lasting for more than 15 years. Within that period of time, we were able to build those 15 low-income apartment buildings that you see throughout Venice. The first set of 7 opened up in 1970. They were models for low-income housing because they don't look like projects. You don't see buildings in Venice looking like projects. They don't look like Aliso Village. They don't look like Jordan Downs. They don't look like any of the congested, dense housing that you see in some parts of the area where it just screams low income and poverty. The 15 buildings that are located on various streets throughout Venice, but if you pay attention, you will see that they are within that area that we were confined to live in during the restricted covenant. It is not by happenstance or chance that those 15 apartment buildings are within the boundaries of Washington Boulevard, Lincoln Boulevard, California Avenue, and Rose Avenue. And so the opportunity to provide housing for low-income individuals in the Venice community was satisfied through those 15 buildings. Now the issue is here and now,